And welcome everybody to the latest episode of the Union Federation podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network. Of course, we bring you all the happenings for Star Trek, the Orville, and whatever crazy things might be going on in that greater universe. But for this episode in particular, it's episode 151 of the Union Federation podcast, and it means we are going to be talking some Star Trek Prodigy as that has returned to the airwaves. But I cannot talk Prodigy alone. And of course, if we're talking Prodigy, that means we must bring in our Holo Captain, the one, the only Holo Captain, ship's counselor, Miss Amy Nelson.
Well, hello.
Amy, we just had episode 150. We wrapped up Lower Decks, and we're about to dive into Prodigy. I'm feeling a little excited, even though it's been a while since we've talked Prodigy.
Yes, I know. And it's like, what's your favorite Star Trek? Well, it's the one that's currently on TV. I'm really enjoying it. Have some questions that we'll get into, but glad to have the crew back.
Absolutely. Speaking of the crew, every crew needs something that's cute and cuddly and just so enjoyable. I don't know where we went wrong, but please welcome Mr. Kevin Reitzel to the podcast.
Where's our cute and cuddly? This is not Kevin.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. I don't compare to Murph, but I can try. Anyway,
yeah.
Good to be back. Okay, full disclosure, we were kind of talking about this before we went on camera here, and we started recording. We kind of jumped into this not really rewatching any of the old episodes, so we're a little rusty here. We're going to do our best to try and remember what's going on, so bear with us here. And as I look back, the last episode, Immoral Star Part 2, it was back in February 3rd, 2022. So that was a while ago.
Yeah, almost.
Please be forgiving as we try to remember who is what, where's what, when's what of Star Trek Prodigy here. So
yeah, absolutely. In this case, I'm very excited to talk Prodigy, guys. There's one piece of news that I wanted to bring up with real quick in conversation. I didn't have it in the notes, but it was something I found very interesting. I did not know this until the other day. Streaming rights, things are bouncing all over the place. Of course, Paramount Plus has been the streaming home for all things Star Trek. I don't know if either of you have noticed in the last couple of weeks, all of these Star Trek movies have left Paramount Plus.
Say what?
What
do you mean?
Apparently, well before Paramount Plus was even founded, there was a contract in place, and all the Paramount Plus, all these Star Trek movies have switched to a different streaming service. I believe they are on Netflix now.
Which is why I believe in physical media. I have all of the original Star Treks, the original crew, and on digital as well. So there you go.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, they went to. They according to the article, they were actually not streaming anywhere for about a month.
Okay.
But
well, I don't know if that surprises me.
You are correct. Okay, so I'm on my Star Trek app. I'm on the Paramount app, and they have Star Trek 09 and Star Trek Into Darkness.
That is it. Anything from the original films, including the Next Generation films, are all off of Paramount Plus now.
And they don't even have Beyond on there.
Nope. This is probably something to where the contract was in place before even Paramount Plus was founded. But this is one of those things that's like, yeah, this isn't a real good look for Paramount Plus right now.
I don't have a 3D TV, but for fun, I did pick up this used copy of Star Trek Into Darkness 3D because it's got the cool, lenticular 3D looking cover. It just looks so cool. Love that.
I do have a 3D TV. I might have to come steal that from you.
How about you just give me your 3D TV? That'd be kind of cool. I'm still looking.
I already gave you a VCR. What are you talking about?
It doesn't compare. But anyway, yeah, I guess if you need your Star Trek, you should probably, just in case, have a physical copy. There you go. Anyway.
Yeah, I just found that a very interesting piece of news, and welcome to the world of streaming right now until I think we're still going to be dealing with some of these contractual rights over a few more years until things really settle in and we figure out what we have. But yeah, a little bit shocking. But we are here to talk about the return of the beloved Star Trek Prodigy, and we are going to be talking about episodes 11 and 12 of Star Trek Prodigy. But before we go any further, that's right, spoiler warning. We're going to be diving deep into episode 11, Asylum, and episode 12, Let Sleeping Borgs Lie. That's always a very good piece of advice, by the way. But yes,
hold on.
Yes, Miss.
Let Sleeping Borgs Lie.
Yeah.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. We are going Star Trek Prodigy, which, as Kevin said, we have not seen since February of 22, almost a full year. Real quick, guys, I'm just going to ask before we dive into our missions looking at the new episodes. What we talked about a little bit because it's been so long. What do you actually remember from Star Trek Prodigy? Because I know everybody on here on the ship liked it and really enjoyed what we saw, but it's been a long gap since we saw Prodigy return.
I guess the question I had was when it takes place, because I guess because Janeway obviously has made it back from the Delta Quadrant from Voyager, and she is now a hologram. She's an admiral now. And then there's this like mining prison planet, where these people were. And then we've got trying to remember everyone's name here. It's tough. Well, we got Dal, right? He's like the kid that's kind of taking charge of the ship here in this ragtag crew. We have Gwyn with the evil father and the stuff that she's trying to remember. Jankum Pog, Jason Matsukas, I guess the engineer, Tellarite, if I remember correctly,
yeah,
right? Tellarite engineer, yeah. And then we have the diviner, the evil dad, I guess, from the future, right? Time traveling, Kyle, if I remember correctly.
And of course, voiced by the great John Noble.
Yeah, John Noble. And of course, we got Murph, voiced by D. Bradley Baker. And of course, Star Wars fans will know that he voices every clone ever from the Clone Wars. And Rock Talk, the rock-looking character, a girl, I guess, voiced by a girl. So still learning these names, Amy. Did you have trouble remembering these names?
Yeah, when last week when we were recording, I was like, "Oh, what's the captain's name?" I finally Dahl, and I was like, I forgot Zero.
Yeah.
So yeah, the when is my biggest concern because we've got the diviner that's from the future, and we've got Admiral Janeway, we have hologram Janeway. Is that the same time period? Then we have Chakotay, and she keeps using the holodeck to figure out what Chakotay. It's back and forwards, hologram, real. It's really confusing for me right now.
Yeah, it takes place sometime after Voyager returns home, and we get Chakotay, as we find out in these episodes, and we'll go more into that. But he had gone on the Protostar to go back to the Delta Quadrant, and then we find out that the Protostar ship was basically a way sabotaged by the diviner to exact revenge on the Federation, and that's kind of where we're at right now, from what I'm getting from these.
So we're gonna probably see how the diviner got control of the Protostar, made it a weapon, and then just left it at the mining planet, and then that's where we pick it up.
So my impression is that we're probably maybe a couple months after the events of episode 10, where they have this big confrontation with the diviner. They leave with the Protostar. Gwen had her memories wiped because she saw Zero's true form in the battle they had with the diviner. They all agree that it's time to seek out Starfleet. That was kind of where we left things off at episode 10. We also find out that Janeway is Admiral Janeway, and she's leading a new ship out on the search for what happened to the Protostar, Chakotay, and the crew of the Protostar. So Admiral Janeway is out. That was the big cliffhanger at the end of episode 10, was that Admiral Janeway was leaving to go find Chakotay and everything like that. So
what ship is she on?
She's on a new ship. She's on a new ship that.
Okay, I kept thinking she was like at Starfleet headquarters or command or something.
No,
so
she's
on
on
a
her own ship.
Okay.
Yes. She's on a ship that at the end of episode 10 was leaving to go find Chakotay.
Okay.
And find out what happened with the Protostar. Of course, and then the Protostar is in possession of Dahl and our group of Prodigy crew here. So let's go ahead and get into our first mission, our first away mission. Miss Nelson, would you be so kind to give us our mission log for this episode?
Yes, weeks after the event in the previous episode, the Protostar crew conduct several missions as they make their way towards Federation space to act as a record for Starfleet to explain what they have been using the ship for. They find a distant Starfleet station and make contact with its caretaker Lieutenant Frex, to request asylum and join the Federation. The final frontier. That was so funny. A biometric scan reveals that Jenkum's Tellurite race is a founding Federation member. Murph is revealed to be a melanoid slug, and that Gwen's Valnakat race is unknown to Starfleet. A stunning revelation is that Dahl's race is known to the Federation and that it needs to be reported to Starfleet as soon as possible. As the rest of the crew explores the station, Zero and Gwen use the station's sick bay to recover memories Gwen lost after catching the glimpse of the unshielded Zero on Tars Lamora. Frex attempts to access Protostar's ship's log, but unknowingly activates the weapon placed aboard it, corrupting the station's computer, which sends the Protostar drifting and causes the station to destroy itself from within. Frex accuses the crew of being saboteurs and escapes the station's only pod. Rocktalk and the team find a way to escape the station's destruction and return to the ship, where Gwen reveals that her memory has been restored and that she now knows everything. Meanwhile, Admiral Janeway aboard the USS Dauntless continues to investigate the reasoning behind the Protostar being in the Delta Quadrant and why its original captain Chakotay, her former second-in-command aboard the USS Voyager, failed to call for help if he was in danger, in addition to where the ship may currently be headed. She arrives on Tars Lamora, where she finds the diviner lying in stasis and plans to possibly get more information from him.
Okay, guys, it had been a bit. There's a lot in this episode. There's something I want to say about Prodigy before we even get started. It's something after watching both of these episodes. I truly do feel that Prodigy might have the most intriguing Star Trek story going right now, more than anything Discovery has had done, more than anything Picard has. There's a mystery here, and there's a lot of things that I'm finding very intriguing. And what I like about it is we do seem to be getting some clues as we go along, but we're also getting this great character development in Prodigy. And that's something I've really enjoyed so far through the Prodigy experience. But we're back after such a long break. So Kevin, what was your first take on this episode of Prodigy?
Well, when they show up to this, this star-based checkpoint, I guess you could say, that's, one of the ones that's way on the outskirts. This is their first connection to Starfleet outside of the ship that they're on. And the first thing I'm thinking of, okay, what's going to go wrong? Because I don't think the story is going to take them to Starfleet, where they're going to, become Starfleet cadets and, mix and mingle with all Starfleet. So we get one Starfleet officer, this Frex character, Lieutenant Frex character, who looks like he might have been on Starbase 80 with the dirty clothes, by the way, reference to Lower Decks there. But seeing Murph, flying in space on this, hanging his tongue out, by the way, when they're trying to escape in the spacesuits, I thought that was very funny. But I'm thinking, okay, what's going to go wrong? And we saw what went wrong. And I guess it's a very clever way to keep the crew away from Federation ships and technology, because whatever is on this ship is creating havoc with anything related to Starfleet, whether it's a ship or in this case, a station. and we just see the station just go crazy all of a sudden, start firing upon itself and destroying itself. And Frex is wondering what's going on, and thinking that they're saboteurs and such. So interesting way for them to kind of keep the crew away from any Federation and to keep them safe. The other thing that was kind of like when they were trying to when Zero and Gwen were in the sick bay trying to recover her memories, it's just like, I was like, why are you in a weird water stasis thing, and why are your hands tied down? She might as well have been a prisoner. I just thought that was kind of weird. But I was kind of curious to see where it was going to go, and it was entertaining.
Miss Nelson, what about you? Your first reactions to this episode? Because there was a I'm not gonna lie, there's a scene in it. I automatically went to you, and I think you know which scene I'm talking about, Amy.
Yes, there were definitely a couple of scenes that were screaming my name, and that one was the first one. It had such a wonderful Kelvin verse feel to it, and they had that music and the beginning, the opening where they're going. Oh, was it this one or the next one? I forget. Where they're in the water.
Yes, when they're
this one.
Yeah,
this
one.
Yeah,
yep.
Okay,
in the beginning.
Yes. And they had the wonderful Giacchino music coming in, and they're going around. It totally reminded me of Into Darkness. Remember when they were in the starship comes out of the ocean, and then they fly away, and Janeway's like, "You almost broke the prime directive." That was the exact opening of Into Darkness. I loved it. And they did have that theme from the Kelvin Timeline movies throughout, which I absolutely loved. And then, of course, we have Rock Talk, who's doing her math and figuring out the physics to land on the protostar because they had to leave the station. And it was just so fun to see all the equations pop up. I do have to chuckle. Some of the equations, I'm like, well, you wouldn't need that equation to do that. But I understand the idea. They just put up a bunch of math formulas to say, ooh, look, we're mathing. So
I got to admit too, guys, that especially the opening scene where they're on the water planet, you had to get a little Voyage Home feel too when they're teleporting the creature
whales
on board and teleporting it to meet its mate. I was definitely feeling that, and I could, Amy, what you said about the music too was so spot on. I definitely picked up on that as well. There's a lot going on in this episode, though. We find out a lot of things in this episode. The revelation of Dahl, that Starfleet knows his race, but highly classified report immediately. So I think that's a new mystery continuing on for Dahl. And one of the things I got to say about this too is, again, I'll come back to this conversation we had very much with Lower Decks, the character development that this show is already doing. In the beginning of Prodigy, when Dahl was so reckless, he would have just been going bonkers over this. And he has this acceptance of, I'll find out when I find out about it. And again, the growth we're already seeing with these characters in just a short time frame, but it's just a credit to how Prodigy is moving at a good pace, even though we have this long delay, but which wasn't their fault. But we're seeing these characters grow. Yes, Amy.
So can I ask you, Jankum Pog is the least developed character, well, outside of Murph, but how can you see his character have growth? How can he progress into, something more suitable for Starfleet? Like Dahl is willing to give up knowing who or what he is, to continue the mission. Like Jankum Pog, especially at the end of the last one, is like, nope, I'm not going to do that. No, you go first. And nope. And I'm just like, okay, when is he going to take that leap? And what is his story? Because we've got basically everyone coming together except him. I'm not seeing that. And I'm wondering, maybe he doesn't need to because he's this Tellurite, but what character growth would you like to see with him?
Kevin, do you have any thoughts on that?
Obviously, he's kind of the comedic guy. He's funny and speaks in the third person. but he does have engineering skills, which is interesting, and I think his character development will happen eventually, like Geordi did, and I think that I would like to see him either, I'm not necessarily saying connect with any family, but connect with someone that he knows from his past. I think that would be kind of cool. Or maybe another Tellarite, who knows? But he kind of seems like a teenage boy, basically, the way that he's acting and talking. But he obviously knows engineering, which is important. And I think his character arc will be really important if he can somehow really get into what this protostar ship is and have some type of handle on it, I guess.
Yeah, I think those are all excellent points too. That for me with Jankum too, I have to keep in my mind this is a show on Nickelodeon, so it is aimed a little bit more for kids. So I think he's kind of the comedy character the kids can laugh at, have some fun with. But I think even trying to kind of hit the memory banks here as far as the first 10 episodes of Prodigy, I think one of the developments for Jacob Pog, and I think it's just slower because of him being a Telluride and things like that, but is that he's learning to be a little less selfish. He's learning to, adjust and in his own way, see how he looks out for the crew as well and how important it is for him to have that family. And I think that's something that's all of them are coming together. Again, in a classic Star Trek rep, the crew becomes a family. And I think you're really starting to see that more and more with this crew early on. And I think even more so when we talk about the next episode. But guys, I want to get into the cast as well, because Kevin, I was looking over the cast. There's some names that are starting to sneak in that are very familiar, that are doing guest voices, or names we now know that maybe even in the first 10 episodes of Prodigy, at least you and I didn't recognize. For instance, of course, the great Jason Alexander is Dr. Noam in this show. Amy, you got that flabbergasted look on your face.
Yes, I did not know this, and Dr. Noam was the most annoying, and now it makes sense.
Kevin, there was a name on here too.
I didn't recognize his voice right away. I'll be honest with you. It went over my head. Yeah. But Jamil as Essentia.
Yes.
Recently we saw her in She-Hulk. So yeah.
We had Bonnie Gordon from Harry Potter fame, Ship's Computer, and David Diggs, who some of you might know from the Snowpiercer show.
Bonnie Gordon. I think that's a different
Ship's Computer.
I think she's a different Bonnie, not the Bonnie from Harry Potter. Looks like her, but a different person.
You might be right.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And then, David Diggs from Hamilton. What are you talking about?
Hamilton, Snowpiercer TV show. We've got more names kind of diving in here to this show that they're bringing in. So Prodigy pulling all the names in. I think the cast is phenomenal. I think that they've done a phenomenal job of casting on this show, Kevin.
Yes, I have a question regarding Zero.
Mm-hmm.
What was it that he did that put the crew in trouble, and now he's feeling bad about it? And what was it that someone saw, Gwen saw, or something? What's his deal? I forgot. I need that reminder.
So back in episode 10, Zero, because Gwen was with the diviner and he was going to take her, and that's when Zero showed himself, and that's how the diviner is floating in space.
So he's very powerful then.
Yes.
yes.
Okay. All right.
I have a question talking about Zero.
Okay.
We know that everyone else is young. Do we think that Zero is young?
I think for her race, she's young, but I'm not going to say she's as young as like a Rock Talk or Doll or something like that. I'd say maybe like Zero's probably in like for her race, probably make like her mid-20s would be roughly my guess. She's got a little bit more worldly knowledge than the others, but has a lot of her own insecurities and self things that she hasn't addressed yet, because I think her race definitely ages much differently. And
so Zero is female because voiced by a male. That's why I'm curious.
I didn't know that Zero was male or female.
Female,
yeah. Emery, yeah. So
I can't remember if they referred to Zero, what they referred to as Zero in the show, if they even have.
Yeah, I don't think that they have pronouns with Zero.
Yeah,
gotcha.
So, well, guys, I do have some trivia and Easter eggs from the show, and I think they tie into some of the things we've talked about. Obviously, Zero is immensely guilty over accidentally hurting Gwen and swears to do everything possible to restore her memories. We just discussed that. In this episode, Admiral Janeway also finds the remnants of one of the comm badges that Dal first found when she comes across the Diviner on the planet she has. So I think that's very interesting. We actually had Dal make a captain's log in this, an official captain's log in this episode as well. Captain's log, stardate 61209.5. It's been weeks since leaving Terras Lorma for good. Saving the unwanted from the Diviner is something we'll always remember, except Gwen. After catching a reflection of Zero's true form, her memories are still a blur. Since then, we've been racking up good deeds, hoping Starfleet will look past the fact we kind of stole the ship. And who knows, if they're as great as Janeway makes them out to be, maybe they'll accept a bunch of kids who don't know where they're going, which would be good to know since we're just now approaching the closest Federation comm relay station in hopes they'll take us in. Suddenly, that dream of finding a place we can all be accepted is actually becoming real. Even I'm starting to believe. So we're seeing that the crew is starting to buy into the Starfleet from top to bottom, and there's an excitement of it. And I think that's what makes what happens in this episode when the protostar infects the station even gives it a little bit of heartbreak feel to it as well. I don't know if you felt that way, Amy.
Yeah, I really liked this. And, when Janeway was putting the comm badge and he's all fidgeting and she's like, just hold still. And, this fits you great. And then he gives her a hug. Oh, just melted my heart. And yes, we now know Dal is all in. Resistance is not futile. We'll talk about that later.
Now, Kevin, I don't think Frex is going to win Starfleet Officer of the Year by any means necessary. He abandons all of them in the escape pod. He's looking a little worse for wear being on that starbase for too long.
Yeah, that wasn't a cool Starfleet move there, even if he expects the children to be saboteurs. So I don't know. I just thought it was weird that he was alone too. I don't know why that was a thing, and only one escape pod. Come on. But regarding Frex, though, I did find another little quick thing, and I think Amy noticed it too, that he hopes that he isn't being reassigned to the planet Nimbus 3, which is Star Trek V Final Frontier reference from 1989. So yeah. By the way, still Kevin here. Don't know or understand how Starfleet dates work.
Yeah, I think that's one of the greatest.
Don't get them. Don't understand them. You could say any number, and I'll just go with it.
Yep.
Still don't make sense to me.
To give you an idea, though, much like Starbase 80 and Lower Decks was wearing outdated uniforms, to establish how isolated the comm relay is, the only guy crewing it is still wearing a later TNG uniform as opposed to anything newer, though strangely he's wearing the style of comm badge seen on Admiral Janeway. Guys, you think he's got some shining things going on here or something, Kevin?
Yeah, like I said, cast off from Starbase 80, the way how dirty he was looking. But like I said, it's weird that he was the only person there. I don't know why that's a thing. I don't think that would ever have been done. You got to have a crew to watch each other's back, and watch movies together.
Yeah, I was totally getting that vibe. Like TNG, they go to a station and like no one's there, just And so when they were going, it was empty. I'm like, ooh, they're gonna find some dead people, or they're gonna scan it and see, oh, Romulans were out here or something. Just something totally TNG. But yeah, it was empty, and I was surprised. I'm like, why is there only one person? Again, reminding me of Star Trek 09 when they go and it's just Simon Pegg's character, right? And then Ginzer.
That little
Keenzer.
weird creature. Yeah, his buddy. But I was wondering I wanted to get your guys' thoughts when Frex was saying, "Hey, step through this like DNA scan thing or whatever it is." Did you think that, like, what good's going to come from that?
All I'm going to say is that device is efficient because it was almost instantaneous with its recognition or non-recognition as well. I mean, it obviously identified the artilleroid very quick, rock tox very quick. We now know that Murph is a melanoid slime worm, Kevin.
Melanoid slime worm. There you go. Have we heard of melanoids before? I don't think so.
No, I think that
Dow species unknown. That was news. So yeah.
Well, not so much. No, not so much. Gwen species, the Val Nakot was not in the database, which isn't surprising because of the time travel. And I figured Gwen probably wouldn't be recognized because I believe she was Gwen was almost genetically engineered anyway. But with Dow's race, it would recognize it, but it was like report to Starfleet, classified immediately. So you wonder what's going on. What's going on there? Is this because it doesn't really hit. Is this a good thing? Is this a good classified? Or is this like, oh no, this is a threat. This is a bad classified thing. So I'm very curious to see how that aspect of it is going to be playing out as well.
And why does a relay station have that DNA scanner? And why do they have this major medical facility that's better than the Protostar? Like the Protostar is the ship of the Federation, right? That's
good point.
So I was just like, why is this runabout station is so much better? I didn't get it.
Yeah, I think those are all very good points, and I think some of it is because of the type of show Prodigy is, just to make some ease of the storytelling. Again, I think unlike Lower Decks, where we know it's aimed for a little bit more of an adult audience, we have to keep in mind Prodigy is Nickelodeon, so I think they're not going as deep as some of the finer points as you would think, because they also know that they're writing for kids as well as adults here. So I think that we have to keep that in mind a little bit with this show. But guys, before we move on, any additional thoughts on this episode or anything, other items you want to point out, Kevin?
I was just trying to remember what was what, but I was reminded how cool the animation was, and how endearing this crew is starting to become. I got to be honest though, as good as the animation is in this one, I was still kind of stuck on Lower Decks animation a little bit. So seeing the human characters that we know are more familiar was a little off to me because I was so used to Lower Decks. So not saying Lower Decks animation is better, but it was just different, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
you definitely need to switch styles.
Yeah.
I agree with you completely. Beautiful animation. I still love the opening to this show. The opening of the show is absolutely gorgeous. That whole thing when you get the face of the holographic Janeway and everything like that within the opening, just well done animation. What about you, Amy? Anything you wanted to add here before we close out on this episode?
So is it at the end of this episode when Janeway, that's where she picks up the diviner, because she goes back to Tars Lamori. So that's why, again, so Prodigy is a couple weeks ahead of where the real life Admiral Janeway is, because she's behind one mission.
She's behind.
I guess you would say. Okay. So we're catching up with her, and she goes, and there was some kind of emergency or something, and they're like, there was some notification. Anyways, I can't remember. And that's why they were directed out to Tars Lamori.
Yeah, they were picking up some notification from Tars Lamori. The Protostar it's been a few weeks since the Protostar had left Tars Lamori after the big confrontation with the Diviner, where he was left in his coma. At the end of this episode, there's a beacon saying, hey, they pick up another distress call, so they decide they're going to go do more good, because so that's kind of where we leave off with the Protostar at the end of this episode, while we see Janeway making probably the wrong call and bringing the Diviner aboard her ship.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a feeling that's going to be an interesting part going forward here. So with that, guys, though, we are going to take a quick break, tell you what else is happening on the Fandom Podcast Network. And when we come back, we're going to dive into episode 12 and answer the very important question. Do we let sleeping Borgs lie? I have an answer. I have my thought on that, but yeah, I agree with Mr. Reitzel there. I think that's usually a pretty good idea. But first, before we get into that, here is what's happening on the Fandom Podcast Network.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. Here are the other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. Culture Clash, where we discuss the latest in entertainment and pop culture. Blood of Kings, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theater, we celebrate our favorite movies. And Time Warp, our fandom flashback show discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie, TV, and pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Hair Metal Podcast, we cover the rock metal music of the 80s and early 90s. Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, discussing the time-traveling Doctor Who universe. Lethal Mullet, an action film podcast covering the 80s, 90s, and beyond. Also, check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, our Star Wars podcast. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast with a deep dive into the final frontier. The Fandom Show, our Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube show discussing the hottest topics in fandom. The True Believers MCU podcast, discussing the Marvel Cinematic and Television Universe. Union Federation, our Star Trek, and the Orville show. And we're proud to welcome the BQN Network to the Fandom Podcast Network. Please visit our friends on the BQN Network, a Star Trek Universe podcast that also includes your favorite topics, movies, history, superheroes, and more. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on YouTube. The Fandom Podcast Network is also on all major podcast platforms. The Fandom Podcast Network audio master feed is on Podbean at fpnet.podbean.com. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
And we're back. Hopefully you're enjoying everything, not only on the Fandom Podcast Network, but the BQN Network as well, our good partners over there as they continue to assimilate the galaxy, which is very appropriate considering what we're about to transport into for our second away mission. Okay, guys, our second away mission is episode 12 of Prodigy, Let Sleeping Borgs Lie. The crew come across the Borg for the first time in this episode. First time we've seen them in Prodigy. It leads to some interesting things to be found out, not only for our crew, but for the ship as well. Miss Nelson, can you give us a mission log?
Yes. The crew watches a holodeck program of Gwyn and the Diviner's conversation regarding the weapon aboard the ship and its devastating purpose. They conduct a search of the ship, but find nothing until a hidden set of letters from Gwyn's home of Asylum is located on the bridge. Her heirloom becomes a key, revealing a hidden subdeck where they find the device. Attempts to destroy it fail as it possesses a self-defense sentience. An alert signals a ship in front of the protostar, and it's revealed to be a deactivated Borg cube. The discovery intrigues everyone else, but Hologram Janeway has severe trepidations due to past experiences with the race. Dahl and company think that maybe the Borg can help figure out how to remove the device, so Janeway reluctantly agrees to try and board the cube. Once again, Zero uses their ability to link to the ship's system, but the crew are suddenly overwhelmed as their actions awaken the dormant Borgs and capture the crew for assimilation. Zero is assimilated into the collective, but Gwyn helps break them away when she alerts them that they swore not to harm anyone, but allowing assimilations would counter their belief. Zero returns to normal, put the entire ship back into dormancy, and the team return to the protostar. The crew learn that the device is a living construct and cannot be removed or destroyed, but decide to continue to use the ship to conduct heroic missions as they respond to a distress signal. Aboard the Dauntless, Admiral Janeway learns that the Diviner is somewhat conscious, but not completely to where she can question him regarding the ship. Lieutenant Essentia suggests using the bioserum in the suit he was in to rejuvenate him, to which Janeway agrees. Directing the ship to the last protostar warp signature, they arrive to find the remains of CR-721, which was destroyed in the previous episode. Janeway comes to the conclusion that Chakotay is no longer in control of the protostar, and that whoever does must be a threat to be stopped. Janeway has the diviner revived, and he awakens.
Guys, there's a lot in this episode that we find out about and set up some things, and of course, the Borg. So, first reactions, Kevin.
I got the feeling, when you watch a horror film and you know about like maybe 5 of the 6 horny teenagers aren't going to make it through the movie, they're going to die in the slasher fic. I'm just like, oh, not the Borg ship. Oh, no. That's pretty much what I was thinking, and kind of curious to see where the diviner thing was going to go. But it's nice to see that Janeway is drinking tea now instead of coffee. I thought that was kind of funny. But just seeing the other side of Starfleet, I'm actually finding really fascinating here, guys. Seeing what she's doing, seeing what, because if you think about it, this is really the first time we're seeing where Starfleet is after Voyager, which is something I've always wanted to see in live action. Getting it in a little bit, though, in animation, I'm fine with that. I'm just kind of curious in a limited form to see where that's going to go, and I hope we see more of it. So,
Miss Nelson.
Kevin, you know why she's drinking tea?
Because the doctor?
Endgame, yeah, the doctor's like, you need to, cut back on the caffeine. Why don't you drink some tea?
Okay.
That's a nod from Endgame.
Nice.
Yeah. I loved, first of all, best of both worlds, when Picard's coming out and he's like, sleep. And Crusher's like, oh, he's exhausted. And then Data's like, well, that may be true, but I think he's trying to tell us something else, that we need to put them to sleep. Like that callback, and that we see that the Borg have to regenerate. It's been used in Voyager, and now it is in Prodigy. I love it because it's a perfect answer to it. So I love that. And the ending of where they're just like, we're going to go do good. Come on. That is Star Trek. I'm so excited that they're teaching that to these children that we're seeing on Nickelodeon, that we need to take that message as like, okay, put it aside. Let's go out and do good. And they make it sound fun and exciting. And like so many times I like try and tell my students, I'm like, it's fun to do good. Let's go do good. Let's do some math. I know that's a stretch, but I think that is the most Star Trek thing that we've seen out of Prodigy, and we got it in this episode.
I think those are all really good points from both of you. What I liked about this episode too is we found out a lot of little things too. We find out here why there's a holographic Janeway on the protostar, because Chakotay wanted it. He wanted Janeway to go with him. She wouldn't, because she was, after the Voyager experience, wanted no part of going back out into space. So it's the hologram Janeway. So we understand fully why there's a holographic Janeway on the protostar. So because she was there for Chakotay to have somebody to relate to and talk to about things. So I think that's very interesting. Obviously, the return of the Borg, seeing our crews identifying with the Borg, and their first reactions to it. And I love the aspect of the fact that here you have Janeway as like the voice of common sense saying, no, we need to get as far away from this as possible. And they're like, no, we got to find an answer to this. This is that they could have it, because we get the other big reveal in this episode of what the weapon is and what basically infected the protostar. And it's actually at least a conscious construct. It defends itself. It won't let you just go in there and take it out and destroy it. So this makes it even more perilous for the fact that they really do need to stay away from any Federation ships, which is going to make it very interesting eventually when the real Janeway at some point probably will catch up to them, whether it's Janeway in charge or the Diviner. That's going to be I think that's going to be a whole other issue before this season is out. Amy, you had a thought you wanted to put in.
Yeah, talking about the weapon, the device, you have a screenshot of Gwen looking at it. And when it popped up, I was like, that looks so familiar. And I remember it from my second year of calculus. I know, sorry, going into a little Amy's math moment, but the design of the red lines, that is a mathematical pattern that's used in calculus and vectors and stuff like that. And I was just super excited to see that. So I'm just throwing that out there.
We just got learned, Kevin.
Yeah, I was thinking it looked like a 80s vector video game, like, Tempest or something like that.
Yeah, I was kind of going that way too. I'm not going to even lie. What I also found interesting is the fact that here's this whole sub deck that they find, and obviously Gwen is the one who's able to open it, but I mean, it makes you wonder how much do they really still know about the ship. And I think this could be one of the fun things also to play out through the season is finding out the mysteries of the protostar. There's so much more to the ship, and I think it's going to actually end up being a character in this season, Kevin.
Definitely. The ship's always kind of presented itself as another character. And your best science fiction series that have ships are the Enterprise was a character, the Millennium Falcon and Star Wars was a character. And I think that it's just important to have a character that is just as mysterious as some other live character that the ship is. And I guess you could say, in a way, the ship is a Trojan horse to anything that is Starfleet. It's going to attack anything Starfleet, sabotage anything that's Starfleet. And I think that's a very smart way to, have this ship do its damage, and thus keeping the crew away from Starfleet until they figure something out. In the meantime, we're going to do good, so.
Them exploring the ship was pretty awesome. And then we get Jenkin Pog. This episode, I did not care for his character. And he's like, I'll be the last one to protect you. No, don't be a coward. And Janeway's like, oh, well, I don't know anything about this deck. Well, you didn't know any. And he sort of talked back to Janeway. And I was like, ooh, you better watch that tone. That would not fly with me. He was too annoying, and I don't know. I didn't care for him this episode. But Janeway didn't know anything, but yeah, she's a hologram. And his answer was like, well, you didn't know, your memory's been erased. Well, that's a fair point, but he just said it in a not nice attitude.
I think you have to take into effect too that for the most part, all these characters are kids themselves. They're teenagers. Yeah. And so I think that's something where
sometimes annoying.
Yeah, sometimes going to be a little annoying. And obviously, Jankum is kind of our character that's like, really sometimes. But again, it's interesting to see. Kevin,
I got a question about the Borg ship I wanted to run by you guys. Okay. The Borg ship seemed really, 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 really big compared to what other ones that we're used to. I mean, it was just gigantic.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was used to, this one just seemed extra big and was reminding me, by the way, of the Krill homeworld on Avatar, the Orville. But because, they're all green and lighted up and everything. But this one just seemed extra huge. Am I the only one that thought that?
No, I actually there was a shot that they showed the protostar right outside the Borg cube, and in this case, the protostar just looked like a little speck. At least the Enterprise in back, it was still small in comparison to the Borg cube, but it seemed a little bit bigger than what the protostar seemed.
Especially when you watch that beginning of Lower Decks and you see all the ships fighting against the Borg cube. This one just seemed really, really big. Not to mention, I thought the Borgs themselves were a little more menacing, especially when you saw other species that were assimilated. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
But Amy, you didn't think this looked bigger than usual?
Yeah, think of Q-Who with this massive cube and the little Enterprise, and the beam cuts out the thing,
No, I
part of the
remember
deck.
that, but it didn't. That Borg ship seems smaller than this one. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I haven't seen it in a while.
Felt, and then going on, like seeing it Best of Both Worlds and in First Contact, like the expansiveness of the cube, I felt it was very Q-Who, very Best of Both Worlds fitting.
I think part of it is because I think the Borg cubes that we saw in Picard did feel smaller. In season 1 of Picard, I think they did feel a little bit smaller because the one that Hugh was controlling and things like that, it did feel a little bit smaller to me on that. So that might be our most recent memory of a Borg cube too. So that's why it's standing out.
I guess there was just a lot of like what do you call it, gantryways and walkways that were like, very high up, and then there's that action scene where, they're trying to escape the Borg and part of it breaks away and you're looking down to like this vastness. And I'm like, man, that's big.
Yeah. So were you, I seriously was, I was looking for those little nodes. Remember when they,
yeah.
I was like, okay.
Destroy the nodes.
Yes.
I was looking for the Borg baby. That's what I was looking for.
Baby's in a drawer.
I got to echo Kevin's point too. And they were able to do this more because of the animation, seeing different species as Borg. I think that was really cool. And it's something that I think it's great to see because we never have really seen it too much within the live action, where here they can animate so many different other species assimilated as Borg. And what I found interesting too is you had the whole kind of subplot was Zero being, I've already been part of a hive mind before because of the nature of my race. So I'm the one that's going to go in. And even she gets Zero gets overpowered by the hive mind that is the Borg. And but Zero's able to pull out of it. And I just found that very interesting. And again, showing just how tight knit this crew is becoming because Zero's able to pull out of that Borg hive mind.
There was that one alien that was holding the alien Borg that was holding Gwyn. It kind of had like the little horns coming out of his neck.
The rhino looking one.
Yeah. It's just made it look kind of cute. That was a cute looking Borg. Anyway.
Yeah, I really liked seeing the different species. And to me, it made the Borg even that much more terrifying. And I wish that we would have seen more of that in, back in TNG, but we're seeing it now. So it's like they were even more terrifying. But then like Zero just easily, okay, Gwen's talking to me. I remember who I am. I don't want to hurt anyone. So now I'm going to break the Borg. And I was like, could it have been more of a struggle? But then to your point, Kyle, Zero's like, I have been in a collective before. So I guess there is that added like leg up where we're supposed to be assimilated. That's what makes the Borg scary. So for Zero to just snap out of it, I was a little hesitant with how quickly Zero was able to snap out.
I also think you're a victim of a 25-minute show as well.
Yes.
So
yeah,
you got to take that into consideration, guys. I want to move into some tropes and trivia and Easter eggs of this episode. But when we're done, there's a particular thing I want to have a conversation on. But I want to get into some of the tropes and trivia here. Adaptive ability. Predictably, Dal manages to kill a total of 1 Borg before the rest adapt to the phasers and become unstoppable.
Saw that coming.
Oh, I know. Yep.
But I liked how they started using muscle when they were knocking them off the gantryways. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah. We mentioned it earlier too. Janeway is forced to switch to T by Dr. Noam in Endgame. Future Janeway told her past self that she had switched to T a while back, though likely under different circumstances.
Are you surprised that it was just black tea because she liked black coffee, right? She just went from black coffee to black tea.
Yeah. And Kevin,
did you love the cup of total TNG cup that Picard used in his
Yes.
Kevin, you brought it up. Melee combat is marginally more effective on the Borg than energy weapons. Star Trek First Contact, even as in Star Trek First Contact, Gwen even forms her morph weapon into a bat'leth in this episode. As the poor security officer in the film First Contact learned, however, they also find out it's a bad idea to fight super strong cyborgs that outnumber you.
Yeah, Worf brings out his mech lift there on the while they're walking on the Enterprise dish, to take out the Borg, and I thought that was cool. That's so Worfy. I like that.
A little dramatic irony. Upon seeing the Borg cube for the first time, the kids have no idea what they're looking at or if it's even a ship. They react with confusion rather than terror and panic, whereas holographic Janeway and the audience have their internal red klaxon alerts revving up in full gear.
I really did like that. And they're like, hey, maybe they can help us, just the naivete of the kids. It was really nice.
Yeah.
I found this interesting. This is something for the keen eye. The episode ends with the diviner in medbay on Janeway's ship, supplied with an IV drip of his life support fluid, as his brain activity is shown on the monitor, going from red to blue before he wakes up. I'm very curious about that, as far as why the color changed and things like that. I think that's going to be interesting. Kevin, giant mook. One of the Borg is a much larger horned humanoid, about the same size as Rock, and easily overpowers her.
According to IMDb, Ben Thomas, who's doing the Borg voices, I think that's the one that's referred to as Rhino Borg.
It can think. The weapon called the Living Construct defends itself and resists his attempts at removal for the foreseeable future. It's stuck where it is. It's so interesting in that the Borg don't even have a name and have no knowledge how to remove this construct, which again leads me to think this is a construct from the future of the Diviner's time that they put on the protostar for the Borg not even to recognize it within their databases.
Kyle, what time frame do you think that the Diviner is in the future
I think it's
from?
a significant time frame. I'm going to say at least 20 to 25 years.
Oh,
I may get the number wrong, but you'll understand when I say it. We're species 8472 and you need them.
Yeah. Oh crap. Holographic Janeway has subdued one upon seeing the Borg cube. While she's a facsimile of the real Janeway, she still knows from Janeway's own experiences and those of Starfleet as a whole exactly how much trouble they're all in.
Mm-hmm.
That was very good, which leads me into the topic I want to talk about here, guys, is Janeway, especially how we have the holographic Janeway and Admiral Janeway, because I'm finding something very interesting here as I'm watching this. I love holographic Janeway. I feel safe with holographic Janeway. She's on our side. She's there for us. I'm not exactly liking Admiral Janeway at this point. I don't want to say she's putting out bad Admiral vibes per se, because we know her intentions are good, but you just feel like, yeah, not digging Admiral Janeway at this point in this show. She's causing more problems than than she is helping here. So I was curious to see if you guys were getting kind of that vibe from Janeway, and I'm props to Kate for absolutely nailing the differences between being the holographic Janeway, who's still Captain Janeway, versus what she is as Admiral Janeway too. I think she's really playing up differences between those two characters, and it's very noticeable, and I'm very much enjoying it, Amy.
Yeah, I think, again, going back to Dr. Noam, and she credits the lieutenant who's like, yeah, let's use the Diviner's own liquid to revive him. And she's like, that is an excellent idea. And then the stupid doctor's like, I could kiss butt or, brown nose better than that. Da, da, da. Okay, first of all, Janeway wouldn't have someone talking back to her or to another crew member. Yeah, and she's a little more cynical and very need to find Chakotay. Everyone else is wrong. Let's get this. But she has limited information. So I understand her logic is sound. She must still be, working with Tuvok. But her cynicism, I think, is much higher.
Kevin, I want to ask you this too with Janeway in regards to Janeway, because we've already kind of even seen a hint at this. She wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea of going back out into space. She seemed like she was done with her starship adventures.
Can you blame her? Yeah,
no, I don't.
I mean, cynical I would get, but she still had that kind of curious detective thing that she always kind of did throughout Voyager. She liked a mystery. That was one of the things that, and she was willing to kind of dive into it first. And also, too, keep in mind, what I liked about Janeway's character in Voyager was that she had this science background, too. She would be able to understand and go back and forth with the engineering discussion or with the discussion. She would come up with something that would be something that she would go to. A lot more than I saw some of the other captains do. She kind of had her thing when it came to that, and really kind of fishing out a mystery. And that's what I see here. I don't know if I dig her hair. It's always a hair thing. I don't know. But I'm kind of curious to see. And like I said earlier, I like seeing this era of Starfleet because I'm kind of curious where it's going. But obviously she has some pull. She's an admiral, and I want to see what's going to happen with her because there's something there. I think there is something noticeable that seems a little off or interesting. One of the two.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it, whether it's this season or in season 2 of Prodigy, because we do know that there will be a season 2 of Prodigy. Yeah, at some point, there's going to be a Janeway back and forth conversation between the holographic Janeway and the real Janeway. One of the things too that I've noticed with the holographic Janeway is she seems much more motherly and protective in a way with this crew, and that's to me more reminiscent of Janeway of Voyager, where the Janeway on the Admiral Janeway is just like laser focused on her mission, and maybe it's not seeing the bigger picture around her, like with the Diviner and things of that nature. I feel like the Captain Janeway of Voyager would have been a little bit more questioning before she just brings the Diviner on the ship. Maybe I'm wrong here because it's been a while since I've watched some Voyager, but that's kind of from my memory. I feel like the Captain Janeway would be a little bit more cautious about bringing something strange onto her ship, especially under the circumstances and things like that. Where I think in this case, she's so determined to find out what happened to Chakotay, she's not she's not letting herself see the full picture of what's going on around her.
Yeah, I think that with a diviner, like if she were Captain Janeway, he would have been rescued, but been put either in the brig or behind
in a stasis field to protect.
But just not leaving out whether he's unconscious or not. No, there would be a force field around him. Yeah. And you bring up a good point and wondering, like, hologram Captain Janeway, do you think that because we now know that holodeck programs can be reactive, like we saw in lower decks, so do you think that because we have Captain Holographic Janeway, that with her mother hen has come out, and like last episode, Dahl gave her a hug and she was like, oh, that's something a hologram's never experienced before, that she is becoming more maternal and taking care of them and making that difference on the hologram because she's sentient or is programmed to adapt?
I think that's a very good point, because the other thing that I'm wondering is if when they programmed this holographic Janeway, if it was based off of her captain's logs from Voyager, it might not have this holograph definitely does not have the cynicism that Admiral Janeway has. And that's something that really comes across to me. Is like you're getting a Janeway from two different time periods here, Kevin.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm just thinking it's kind of funny that how she's had to become this kind of motherly figure and a protector and someone who's trying to guide these poor kids in charge of this ship here. But I like it though. I like the dichotomy between the two Janeways and that we're seeing that. I think that I find that fascinating.
Yeah, and again, just a quick shout out to Kate Mulgrew, because she is just nailing both performances. It's one of those things we're seeing it a lot more, where an actor is taking the same character in different time frames, and she's doing a phenomenal job with it on this show.
I forget where in the United States, but I saw a recent picture of her in a statue in front of Janeway, where it's the future birthplace of Janeway. Did you guys see that?
Iowa. I think it's in Iowa.
Indiana.
Indiana.
That's right.
Indiana. Okay. I thought that was really, really cool.
Iowa is Kirk.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
So, no, yeah, I think it was a phenomenal episode. I love bringing in the Borg. I love everything that they're doing. And like you said, Amy, now we're on a path where I wonder how much, if we're going to have a few episodes where we just see the Prodigy crew doing good out there in the universe, and then we kind of have a little bit of follow up with Admiral Janeway and her crew here and there, how they're planning to do that out. But that's what makes this one of the things I'm liking about this show is it's working very much to me like Strange New Worlds, where you kind of have a little bit of that underlying connective tissue, but each story is a little bit of its own thing as well. And I think really what we're seeing between Strange New Worlds and Prodigy is really probably the best form telling of Star Trek, and what this is the form telling that Star Trek really truly works in, instead of having constant overarching stories, which I'm not saying it's bad that they do that, but I just feel like it feels more Star Trek this way than it does in the other way. I'm curious if you guys are feeling that same thing from Prodigy so far, even though we do have the underlying Diviner storyline and what's going on with the Protostar, we're still getting some kind of weekly episodes as well as individual stories here. So I think they have a good balance. Kevin, what do you think?
I think so, but I think Amy's right when it comes to characters that need a little more character development, and and pulling, and basically knowing that we can rely on them in the post that they are. Yes, they're kids to some degree here, but I just hope they don't placate too much to the younger generation. It's okay. We got Murph. Murph placates to me. I love me some Murph, but Rock Talk and everyone else in the cast. I do want to see it. It's nice to see them come together. I'm glad, but Jankum Pog, and I want to know more about Zero. Zero's still kind of freaking me out a little bit. I'm just gonna say.
Yeah, I can agree with that. What about you, Amy? Do you feel like that it's how they're telling the story Prodigy so far is working? And any other final thoughts on this episode?
Yeah, I think looking at the new treks, you're right. Prodigy is most similar to Strange New Worlds. I'm like, Lower Decks is episodic, but they don't have the underlying overall arc, which I love, because we get the overall arc story galore with Discovery and with Picard. So this is like muted story arc with little episodes, and that is a great balance, because but in discussing, if we have too much time off, we forget the points of the big arc, because at the top of this episode we were like, what's going on, what time frame, where are we, so there is a give and take. And I think once how many weeks do we get? Is it 10 this time?
Yeah, another 10 episodes, I believe.
Yeah, so we're gonna be, this is just the first two. It's gonna be great here on out, now that our brains are refreshed.
Ken, I want to give you a chance. Any final thoughts on this episode before we warp out on this?
The story's developing enough to where I'm very curious to see where they're going to go next. And I have to remind myself to kind of watch it through the eyes of a kid. That's one thing I was reminding myself when I was watching this again, because, obviously they're going to look at the Borg and not know who the heck they are. And they're not going to listen to the adult telling them not to do it, So, it's one of those things you have to kind of remind yourself that you do. But they're throwing out a lot of different strings here that will be connected eventually. And I'm curious to see where those go.
Yeah, Prodigy has been a surprise for me. I'll be honest with you. I was at the time when they announced this animated project, I wasn't sure how go to kiddie in this case or not. Kind of where I had these reservations about Lower Decks. Was it going to get too out there and too cutesy with what it was doing with trying to be funny and stuff like that? With Lower Decks, I was worried was it going to get too childlike? Now, being an animation fan, I was in love with the animation, so I was in on that aspect. But I really think the story has been so much more than what I expected it. and like you, Kevin, I do have to remind myself that we are watching a 25-minute weekly kids show. So I have to keep that in mind in some of the story development and things like that. But I think they've done a pretty good job of balancing it to where this is a show that parents can watch with their kids and get just as much of enjoyment out of it as the kids are getting out of it as well. And I think it's something that really brings a Star Trek family together. And so that's where I think Prodigy is doing a phenomenal job, and I cannot wait for the remainder of this season 1 and beyond, because Prodigy is going to be around for a little while. So I'm looking very forward to it. Amy?
And let's go out and do some good. Come on.
Absolutely.
Such a good message.
With that, we're going to be transporting out of this away mission. Now, guys, before we close out, I have turned on the communications array. It's time to intercept some subspace signals. Well, first of all, we've hoped you enjoyed our conversation covering episodes 11 and 12 of Star Trek Prodigy. I'm looking forward to covering the rest of the season as well, but there's a couple great places where you can find not only the Union Federation, but a lot of great things happening in fandom. And of course, first and foremost, that starts with the Fandom Podcast Network. Of course, you can find us on our audio master feed at fpnet.podbean.com. Of course, visit our YouTube channel too, where we put up videos of all of our shows. Just search for the Fandom Podcast Network. Give us a like, give us a share, subscribe. We love to get your input as well. You can also follow the Fandom Podcast Network page on Facebook, as well as the Union Federation page on Facebook, where we keep you updated with all of the Star Trek news, as well as hopefully some Orville news sooner than later, guys. I know we're all still kind of waiting in bated breath, but having a little patience, because we know in the world of things today, sometimes it takes a little while before announcements gets made, but hopefully we are going to get some announcements. You can also email the Union Federation at unionfederation@gmail.com, but that is not the only place you can find the Union Federation, because you can also find it being part of the collective of the BQN, Amy Nelson.
Yes, you can search Union Federation and there it will be. You can hear us there. Please do so.
And of course, too, as always, you can find all of us on Twitter as well, including myself, Kyle, on Twitter at AKyleW, or on Instagram at AKyleFandom. Kevin, where can people find you on social media?
You can find me at the Union Federation Facebook group, of course. I'm always there. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Spartan_Phoenix, and as well on Facebook.
Now, Amy, not only are you on social media, but you're also broadcasting on some other subspace signals on the BQN as well.
Yes, well, you can hear me talk all things next gen on Galaxy Class, also on All Good Things, and out there on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson.
And of course, too, you can find our wonderful science officer who will hopefully be rejoining the crew of the Union Federation soon, Haley Stoddard at Trekkie01D. And of course, you can follow the BQN at BQN Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. And as far as the Fandom Podcast Network, at FanPod Network on Twitter as well. Guys, I'm excited to be back in Prodigy. I'm going to appeal to all the listeners out there, though. I still need some leads on a stuffed Murph for Kevin. Kevin needs a stuffed Murph.
Get on it.
Yeah, we're working on it. If you guys are all waiting for the Murphamorphosis that we've seen in the trailers, I can understand that. We want to make sure Kevin has the most lovable, squishy Murph possible.
And I think we're right at the beginning of the metamorphosis Murph.
Yeah, he was making some sound.
Yeah, he wasn't feeling too good.
And of course, when we look ahead in the Orb of Prophecy, we'll be back in 2 weeks on the Union Fed to talk episode 13, All the World's a Stage, as well as episode 14, which we do not know the name of yet. And of course, looking ahead, we will have Picard in February, most notably starting February 16th, 2023. And of course, in 2023 as well, Discovery Season 5 and Strange New Worlds Season 2. We can't wait. Hopefully, we'll have some Orville news for 2023 as well. Fingers crossed. But until then, I want to thank my wonderful crew, as always, for bringing the Star Trek knowledge and just making the show always a fun thing to record. And for you wonderful listeners out there for supporting us, both Fandom Podcast fans and BQN fans, because we're all one big family here. Guys, thank you so much. Everybody out there, do good things. Take on good missions. And until next time, goodbye, everyone. Hailing frequencies are now closed.